The morning light filtered through the delicate prisms of my latest creation, casting rainbow fragments across my workbench. I held the engagement ring up to the window, watching how the platinum setting embraced the diamond like a lover's hands. Perfect, just like everything else about my life seemed to be. The irony of that thought would haunt me later. I'm Claire Matthews, owner of Precious Moments, a boutique jewelry studio in downtown Boston where I transform precious metals and stones into pieces that mark life's most significant moments. Each ring, each pendant I create carries a story, promises of eternal love, celebrations of milestone achievements, memorials of cherished memories. Now I was crafting the most important piece of my career, my own engagement ring. Luke Pearson had proposed 3 months ago, on a moonlit evening at the harbor. He'd presented me with a simple placeholder band, insisting that I should design my own ring since jewelry was my passion. Something as unique as you are, he'd said, his blue eyes twinkling with that boyish charm that had first captured my heart 2 years ago. The bell above my shop door chimed, pulling me from my reverie. A woman walked in, tall, elegant, with flowing dark hair and designer clothes that whispered of old money. Her heels clicked purposefully across the hardwood floor. "Welcome to Precious Moments," I said, carefully setting aside my work. "How can I help you?" She smiled, though something in her eyes seemed troubled. "I hope you can. I have a rather special piece that needs restoration." From her purse, she withdrew a ring box, Tiffany blue, weathered at the edges. My stomach tightened inexplicably as she opened it. The ring inside was exquisite, a vintage Art Deco piece featuring a cushion-cut diamond surrounded by sapphires. But what caught my eye wasn't the design, it was the distinctive maker's mark on the inner band. I'd seen it countless times before, studying my grandfather's work from when he first opened this shop 50 years ago. "Beautiful piece," I managed, my professional mask firmly in place. "May I ask where you acquired it?" "Oh, it was a gift," she said, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the edge of the box. "From Luke. Luke Pearson. He said it belonged to his grandmother." The world tilted sideways. Luke's grandmother's ring was safely stored in my workshop safe, waiting to be redesigned into a pair of earrings for his mother's birthday next month. I knew this because we discussed it just last week over dinner. Luke Pearson. I kept my voice steady, years of dealing with demanding clients finally proving useful. "The investment banker?" She brightened. "Yes. Do you know him? He's absolutely wonderful, isn't he? We've been dating for 6 months now, and he just gave me this ring last week. Said it was a family heirloom." 6 months. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 6 months ago, Luke and I had been planning our wedding venue tours. 6 months ago, he'd surprised me with a weekend getaway to the Berkshires, claiming he needed to work late the following week to make up for the time off. 6 months of lies, of carefully orchestrated deceptions. "The setting is quite delicate," I heard myself saying, as if from a great distance. "May I take a closer look?" She handed over the ring, and I examined it under my jeweler's loupe, noting the precision of my grandfather's work while my mind raced. This was one of his signature pieces from the 1970s, I recognized it from the shop's archives. Someone had purchased it last month, paying in cash. The receipt had been signed, L. Pearson. "The prongs need tightening," I said, lowering the loupe. "And there's somewhere on the gallery that should be addressed. I can have it ready by next week. Will that work for you?" "Perfect." She beamed, writing down her contact information. "I'm Julia Winters. Luke speaks so highly of this area, I can't believe I've never explored it before. We should get coffee sometime." I smiled, the expression feeling like broken glass on my face. "That would be lovely." I wrote up the repair ticket, my handwriting surprisingly steady. "Will you be picking it up, or should I expect Luke?" "Oh, I'll come by. He's always so busy with work these days, flying off to meet clients." She laughed lightly. You know how it is with men in finance. I did know. Those business trips to New York, Chicago, San Francisco, how many had been real? How many had been spent with her? After she left, I sat at my workbench, staring at my unfinished engagement ring. The diamond caught the light, throwing accusations across the walls. Slowly, deliberately, I opened my phone's calendar, scrolling through months of carefully noted dates, Luke's trips, late nights at the office, cancelled dinners due to client emergencies. The pattern emerged like a photograph developing in darkroom chemicals. Every time he'd been away, his social media showed him at local restaurants, art galleries, theater openings. Always carefully avoiding tagging locations, but I recognized the backgrounds, the distinctive architecture of Boston's historic districts. He'd been here all along, living a double life with the precision of a master jeweler. My hands found the small velvet box containing my grandmother's pearls, my something old for the wedding. Next to it lay swatches of silk for my dress, paint samples for the house we'd planned to buy, and a stack of save-the-date cards waiting to be addressed. Each item a strand in the web of lies he'd woven around me. The sun was setting when I finally moved, casting long shadows across my workbench. I picked up Julia's ring, my grandfather's ring, and held it to the light. The sapphires winked at me like conspirators sharing a secret. My phone buzzed, a text from Luke about dinner plans for tomorrow. I looked at my engagement ring one last time before placing it in my safe. Then I began sketching a new design, one that would tell a very different story. Because if Luke Pearson thought he could play games with a woman who shaped metal and stone for a living, he was about to learn just how sharp the edges of betrayal could be. Rage has a texture. I discovered this as I sat in my darkened workshop long after midnight, turning Julia's ring over in my hands. It feels like frost forming on glass, like metal cooling after being shaped by fire. My anger crystallized into something precise and geometric, each facet reflecting a different lie Luke had told me. The next morning, I went through the motions of normalcy with the mechanical precision I usually reserved for setting microscopic stones. I answered Luke's morning text with the proper amount of emojis. I opened my shop at exactly 9 a.m. I even managed to smile at Mrs. Henderson when she came to pick up her anniversary pendant. But beneath this carefully maintained facade, I was excavating every memory, every moment with Luke, searching for signs I should have seen. Each revelation was a new cut, precise and deliberate, reshaping my understanding of the past 2 years. The lunch date where he'd been distracted by his phone, had he been texting her? The weekend conference in New York that he'd said was mandatory, had she been there, sleeping in the hotel room I'd helped him book? The long hours at the office that had started 6 months ago, had he been leaving early, meeting her at candlelit restaurants while I waited at home, trusting and blind? My phone buzzed. Luke's face appeared on the screen, smiling that devastating smile that had once made my heart skip. Now it made my stomach turn. "Hey beautiful," his voice was warm honey, practiced and perfect. "How about dinner tonight? That new Italian place you've been wanting to try?" I watched my free hand curl into a fist, nails leaving crescent moons in my palm. "I'd love to," I heard myself say, the lies flowing as smoothly as his hat. 7 o'clock. Perfect. You're the best, Claire. I love you. The words hit like hammer blows on hot metal. "Love you too," I managed, ending the call before the bitter taste in my mouth could seep into my voice. I turned back to Julia's ring, now secured in my workstation. The sapphires watched me like knowing eyes as I began the delicate work of restoration. Each tiny scratch in the metal was a testament to time and wear, honest damage, unlike the carefully concealed fractures in my relationship. The door chimed. I looked up to see Ellie, my oldest friend and voice of reason since college, striding in with 2 coffee cups and concern etched across her face. "Spill," she demanded, setting my vanilla latte in front of me. "Your text last night made no sense, and you look like you've been hit by a truck carrying emotional baggage." I told her everything. The words poured out like molten metal, taking shape as they cooled in the air between us. Julia's visit. The ring. The lies. With each detail, Ellie's expression darkened. "That calculating bastard," she breathed when I finished. "Claire, you have to confront him. Call off the wedding. Hell, call the police, there must be some law against this level of emotional fraud." I shook my head, running my fingers along the edge of my workbench. No. Not yet. The plan was taking shape in my mind, like a design emerging from raw materials. If I confront him now, he'll just spin more lies. He'll say it was a misunderstanding, that Julia's delusional, that the ring is a coincidence. He'll try to gaslight me into doubting what I know. So what are you going to do? I picked up my grandfather's loupe, examining Julia's ring with professional detachment. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. The perfect, trusting fiancé. I'm going to plan our wedding, smile at his jokes, and pretend I don't know that every kiss is a lie. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to find out everything. Every detail. Every secret. Every weakness. Claire. Ellie's voice held a warning. Revenge isn't the answer. It won't make you feel better. This isn't about feeling better. I set the loop down with precise care. This is about justice. About consequences. He's played with people's lives, their hearts, their futures. He's used my grandfather's legacy as a prop in his performance. I met Ellie's worried gaze. Tell me, what's the appropriate response to someone who treats love like a game of chess? Checkmate, she whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. I nodded, turning back to Julia's ring. The restoration would take time I could use to learn more about Luke's carefully constructed house of cards. I'm going to fix this ring, I said, selecting my tools with deliberate care. Make it perfect. Stronger than before. And when I'm done, it's going to tell a story that Luke never intended. Ellie watched me work in silence for a long moment. Just, be careful, she finally said. Men like Luke, when they're cornered, they can be dangerous. I thought of the precision tools in my hands, capable of both creation and destruction. So can I. That evening, I sat across from Luke at Bella Luna, watching him peruse the wine list with practiced sophistication. Every gesture, every smile, every casual touch now seemed performative, a masterclass in manipulation. He ordered my favorite wine, remembered details about my day that I'd mentioned in passing, played the role of devoted fiancé to perfection. I smiled, laughed at his jokes, and felt the weight of Julia's ring in my workshop safe like a promise. Luke might be skilled at playing roles, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. I came from a long line of artisans who understood that the most beautiful creations often required breaking something down to its component parts before rebuilding it into something new. As Luke raised his glass in a toast to our future, I saw the future he couldn't imagine, one where his carefully constructed facade would shatter like crystal against stone. The only question was, when the pieces fell, would he recognize the hand that had orchestrated his downfall? The days following my discovery unfolded like sheets of hammered gold, thin, bright, and sharp at the edges. Each morning brought a new text from Luke, each evening another performance of devoted love. I wore my role like a second skin, wondering if this was how he felt, this constant awareness of every gesture, every word, every calculated display of affection. Julia's ring sat on my workbench, its restoration nearly complete. I found myself talking to it during the long hours alone in my workshop, as if the metal and stones could absorb the poison of my thoughts. The sapphires had begun to feel like silent witnesses to my transformation, their deep blue depths holding secrets just as I now did. When my phone lit up with Julia's number, I wasn't surprised. The universe, it seemed, had developed a taste for dramatic irony. Claire. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Her voice carried the same elegant warmth I remembered, though now I wondered if her polish masked similar cracks to my own. Not at all, I replied, setting down my tools. Your ring is coming along beautifully. Actually, I was hoping we could meet for coffee. There's something about the ring's history I'd like to discuss. My heart stumbled in its rhythm, but my voice remained steady. Of course. There's a cafe next door to my shop. Would this afternoon work? 2 hours later, I watched Julia approach through the cafe window. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of being admired, her dark hair catching the autumn sunlight. I wondered if Luke had a type, or if he deliberately chose women who were different enough to avoid suspicion. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Up close, I could see the faint shadows under her carefully applied concealer, the slight tension in her smile. "I've been doing some research on the ring's provenance, and something isn't adding up." I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter heat ground me. "What seems to be the problem?" Luke said it was his grandmother's ring, passed down through generations. She twisted her napkin between manicured fingers. But when I mentioned it to his sister at a charity event last week, she had no idea what I was talking about. In fact, she said their grandmother's jewelry had been sold years ago to pay for medical bills. The lie unraveled between us like a loose thread, waiting to be pulled. I could have yanked it then, watched the whole fabric of Luke's deception come apart. Instead, I found myself studying Julia's face, really seeing her for the first time. Beyond the expensive clothes and perfect makeup, I recognized something in her eyes. The same growing doubt I'd been living with, the same creeping suspicion that something in her carefully constructed world wasn't quite right. "Julia," I said carefully, "what if I told you that ring has a different history? One that starts in this very neighborhood, in a small jewelry shop that's been here for 50 years. She went still, her coffee untouched before her. "I'm listening." I told her everything. About my grandfather's craftsmanship, about finding the receipt signed by Luke, about the real family heirloom waiting to become his mother's earrings. With each revelation, I watched the color drain from her face, replaced by a fury that matched my own. 6 months, she whispered when I finished. He told me he was single. Said he'd been focused on his career, waiting for the right person. A harsh laugh escaped her. I suppose that wasn't a complete lie, he was waiting. Just not for me. "How much do you know about him?" I asked, leaning forward. "His daily routines, his business contacts, his real estate holdings." A slow smile spread across her face, not the polished society smile she'd worn before, but something sharper, more dangerous. "I know everything. When you're dating someone like Luke, you learn to pay attention to details. Especially when things don't quite add up. Would you be willing to share those details?" She met my gaze, and in that moment, I saw my own calculated rage reflected back at me. "You're planning something. Let's call it a lesson in consequences." I pulled out my phone, showing her the wedding venue deposits, the catering contracts, the thousands of dollars Luke had convinced me to invest in our future. "He's played both of us for fools, using our trust like currency. I think it's time we showed him exactly how expensive that can be." Julia's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "What did you have in mind?" I described my plan, watching her expression shift from skepticism to appreciation to wicked delight. By the time I finished, our coffee had gone cold, but something else had warmed between us, a conspiracy born of shared wounds and common purpose. "It's brilliant," she said, "but risky. If he suspects anything." "He won't." I thought of Luke's easy smile, his absolute confidence in his own charm. Men like him can't imagine being outsmarted. Their greatest weakness is their certainty that they're the cleverest person in the room. As we parted ways, Julia paused. "Claire. Thank you. For telling me the truth. For not hating me." I touched her arm gently. "Hate is a waste of energy. Besides, we're not his victims anymore. We're something far more dangerous, women with nothing left to lose and everything to gain." That evening, I returned to my workshop, where Julia's ring waited. As I made the final adjustments to the setting, I thought about how fitting it was. This piece that had exposed Luke's lies would now become the instrument of his undoing. Like the ring itself, we had been damaged by his deception, but we would emerge stronger, more brilliant, and infinitely more dangerous than he could have anticipated. I picked up my engraving tool, ready to add the final touch to my grandfather's creation. Some messages are written in metal and stone, visible only to those who know where to look. And this one would be a masterpiece of subtle devastation. Revenge, I discovered, tastes like metal shavings on the tongue, sharp, bitter, with an aftertaste that lingers long after you've swallowed your pride. I savored it as I worked late into the night, transforming Julia's ring into something more than just jewelry. Each stroke of my tools was deliberate, precise, laden with purpose that went beyond mere restoration. The engraving I added to the inner band was subtle, a date and 2 sets of initials, positioned where only someone examining the ring closely would find them. Luke's arrogance would be his undoing. He'd never think to check for such details before presenting the ring as a family heirloom. The truth would remain hidden until the perfect moment, like a time bomb ticking away beneath the sapphires. Julia had become an unexpected ally in this elaborate dance of deception. Her inside knowledge of Luke's recent life proved invaluable, filling in the gaps of his carefully constructed facade. Over wine in her penthouse apartment, she revealed the extent of his manipulation. "He has a whole separate phone," she said, swirling her Cabernet. "Keeps it in his office desk. That's how he's managed to keep his story straight." Her laugh was hollow, echoing against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. "He even has different personalities for each of us. With me, he's the ambitious businessman who needs a sophisticated partner. With you, the devoted romantic who just wants a simple life," I finished, the words tasting like ash. "He's crafted himself into exactly what each of us wanted." "Men like Luke," Julia mused, "they're like method actors who've lost themselves in too many roles. They forget who they really are beneath all the performances." I thought of how convincingly he'd played his part just hours earlier, during our wedding venue tour. How he'd squeezed my hand at all the right moments, teared up when discussing our future children, charmed the event coordinator with his sincere smile and warm laugh. Every gesture a carefully choreographed step in his elaborate production. "Tomorrow night," I said, setting down my glass, "at the charity gala. That's when we begin." Julia's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Are you ready?" The question resonated through me like a tuning fork struck against stone. Was I ready to dismantle the life I'd thought I was building? To watch the man I'd loved reveal himself as a stranger wearing a familiar face? "I've been ready since the moment I saw your ring," I replied, my voice carrying the weight of certainty that comes from crossing a point of no return. "Luke's built his whole world on lies. It's time we showed him how fragile that foundation really is." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Luke had invited both of us to the gala, me as his fiancée, Julia as a potential client for his investment firm. He'd counted on the size of the event to keep us from crossing paths, just as he'd counted on our different social circles to prevent any overlap. His perfectly compartmentalized lives were about to collide in spectacular fashion. Back in my workshop, I finished the final touches on Julia's ring. The restoration was complete, but I'd added something extra, a nearly invisible alteration to the setting that would make it catch the light in a very specific way. Under the bright chandeliers of the gala ballroom, it would create a distinctive pattern, one that would match perfectly with my engagement ring. I held both rings side by side, watching them catch the light. Together, they told a story, not the one Luke had intended, but one of betrayal, discovery, and calculated retribution. My grandfather had always said that every piece of jewelry carries a story in its metal. These rings were about to tell the story of Luke's downfall. My phone buzzed, a text from Luke: "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night, beautiful. You're going to take everyone's breath away." I smiled at the screen, feeling the sharp edges of my plan press against my conscience like diamonds against glass. He had no idea how right he was. Tomorrow night would leave everyone breathless, but not for the reasons he imagined. As I prepared to leave the workshop, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me was someone new, someone forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the cold precision of revenge. Gone was the trusting jeweler who believed in love's simple beauty. In her place stood someone harder, more brilliant, cut with facets that could either catch the light or draw blood. Julia's ring sat in its box on my workbench, the sapphires watching like patient sentinels. Tomorrow, it would play its part in our performance. Tomorrow, Luke would learn that some stories aren't about love at all, they're about justice, served cold and sharp as a diamond's edge. I touched my own engagement ring, feeling its weight like a promise. Not a promise of love anymore, but a promise to myself. Every lie Luke had told, every heart he had played with, every moment of trust he had betrayed, it would all come full circle under the glittering lights of the gala. The night settled around my workshop like a velvet cloak, and in the darkness, I allowed myself one moment of doubt. Not about what I was about to do, but about who I had become. The woman who had loved Luke would never have contemplated such elaborate revenge. But then again, that woman had died the moment Julia walked into my shop. In her place was someone new, someone dangerous, someone who understood that sometimes the most devastating blows are struck not with force, but with precision, patience, and the kind of cold calculation that turns betrayal into art. The gala transformed Whitmore Hall into a cathedral of light and deception. Crystal chandeliers spun shadows across marble floors, while Boston's elite moved through the space like expensive chess pieces, each calculating their next move. I stood at the entrance, wearing a midnight blue gown that felt like armor, watching Luke work the room with the practiced ease of a con artist who'd forgotten he was performing. My engagement ring caught the light as I accepted a glass of champagne, its brilliance now seeming less like love and more like a warning signal I'd failed to heed. Across the room, Julia made her entrance in crimson silk, wearing the restored ring like a secret weapon. Our eyes met briefly, a silent confirmation that every piece was in position, every trap perfectly set. "There's my beautiful fiancée," Luke's voice carried that particular warmth he reserved for public displays of affection. His hand found the small of my back, and I forced myself not to flinch from his touch. "You look absolutely stunning tonight." I turned to face him, studying the familiar planes of his face. The smile that had once melted my defenses now revealed itself as merely a well-practiced arrangement of muscles and intent. "You clean up pretty well yourself," I replied, letting my lips curve into the smile I'd rehearsed in my mirror until it looked genuine. "Some potential investors I need to charm," he murmured, already scanning the crowd over my shoulder. "Save me a dance." "Of course." I watched him navigate through the crowd, noting how he carefully maintained the perfect distance from Julia's position near the bar. Even now, his movements were choreographed with precision, always aware of the invisible lines he'd drawn between his separate worlds. The evening unfolded like a slow-motion tragedy, each moment weighted with the anticipation of inevitable collapse. I played my role flawlessly, the adoring fiancée, the successful businesswoman, the perfect complement to Luke's carefully crafted persona. But beneath every laugh, every touch, every seemingly casual conversation, I was counting down the minutes. Julia and I had synchronized our watches earlier that day, in the sterile confines of her corporate office. The timing had to be perfect, a dance of revelation choreographed down to the second. Now, as the orchestra struck up a waltz, I felt the weight of the moment pressing against my skin like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen," the event chairman's voice carried across the ballroom, "we're now opening the silent auction for our annual Children's Hospital fundraiser. Please take a moment to view the extraordinary items generously donated by our community members." This was the cue we'd been waiting for. I watched Juliet drift toward the display cases, where her ring would catch the precisely arranged spotlights in a way that would make its unique properties impossible to ignore. I made my way to the opposite side, positioning myself where my own ring would create a matching pattern. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. 2 rings, 2 women, one undeniable connection that would be impossible for Luke to explain away. But as I stood there, feeling the weight of imminent destruction, a strange calm settled over me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about reclamation. Of truth, of power, of the narrative that had been stolen from us. Luke appeared beside me, his presence setting off alarm bells that I'd once mistaken for butterflies. "See anything interesting?" he asked, gesturing to the auction items. "You could say that." I turned slightly, letting my ring catch the light. Across the room, Julia shifted position, and the matching patterns danced across the wall like accusatory ghosts. I saw the exact moment Luke noticed. His face remained composed, he was too skilled a performer for anything else, but his eyes betrayed him, darting between the 2 rings with growing comprehension. A muscle twitched in his jaw, the first crack in his perfect facade. "Fascinating craftsmanship, isn't it?" I kept my voice pitched for perfect casual interest. The way certain pieces of jewelry can tell stories we never intended them to share. Before he could respond, Julia approached, her timing impeccable. "Luke, darling," she called, loud enough to draw the attention of nearby guests. "I've been meaning to ask you about this ring. The most curious thing, someone at the jeweler's mentioned it wasn't actually a family heirloom." The silence that followed was exquisite, a perfect crystalline moment of suspended reality where Luke's carefully constructed world began to fracture along fault lines of his own making. I watched his mind race behind those charming eyes, calculating odds, weighing lies, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. But we weren't finished. Not yet. Because revenge, like the finest jewelry, requires layers of craftsmanship to achieve its full effect. And the next phase of our plan was about to begin, a devastating finale that would ensure Luke Pearson's downfall would be as public as it was complete. In the crystalline silence that followed Julia's revelation, I watched Luke's composure crack like thin ice under unexpected pressure. The sophisticated crowd around us stilled, sensing the electric charge of impending scandal with the practiced intuition of predators scenting blood in the water. "Ladies and gentlemen," I heard my voice carry across the marble expanse, steady as a blade, "I believe we have an unscheduled presentation tonight." My fingers traced the edge of my engagement ring, feeling every facet I'd cut with my own hands. A story about craftsmanship, not just in jewelry, but in deception. Luke's hand shot out to grasp my arm, his fingers pressing into my skin with desperate force. "Claire," he whispered, his charm cracking to reveal the panic beneath, "whatever you think you know dash." I turned to face him fully, letting him see the transformation in my eyes. Gone was the trusting woman he'd thought he could control. In her place stood someone forged in the fire of his betrayal, tempered by rage and honed to a dangerous edge. "What I think I know." The words carried across the now silent ballroom. "Let me tell you what I know with absolute certainty, Luke. I know that you purchased my grandfather's ring last month, presenting it to Julia as a family heirloom while simultaneously planning our wedding. I know about the separate phone in your office desk, the careful scheduling of your supposed business trips, the elaborate web of lies you've woven to maintain your double life." Julia stepped forward, her crimson dress catching the light like spilled wine. "And I know about the trust fund you've been siphoning from, Luke. The one you told me needed emergency investment to save your family's legacy. The same story you used on Rebecca Torres 6 months ago, and Catherine Walsh before her." The crowd's murmur rose like an approaching storm. Among them, I recognized faces from Luke's investment firm, their expressions shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension. In the corner, I saw his managing partner pull out his phone, fingers flying across the screen with urgent purpose. Luke's facade finally shattered completely, his handsome features twisting into something ugly and desperate. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled, low enough that only I could hear. "You have no idea what you've done." I smiled, feeling the sharp edges of my victory cut into my own heart even as I delivered the final blow. "Actually, I do. You see, Julia isn't just another victim of your romantic cons. She's the SEC's newest forensic accountant. And those investment documents you've been so carefully doctoring? They've been under federal investigation for weeks. The color drained from his face as two men in dark suits emerged from the crowd, their federal badges catching the light like omens. "Luke Pearson," one called out. "We need you to come with us." What followed was a blur of activity, Luke being led away, the shocked whispers of the crowd, the flash of phones capturing his downfall for posterity. But I remained still, a fixed point in the chaos, watching the destruction of the life I'd thought I would have. Julia appeared at my side, her presence oddly comforting in its conspiracy. "Are you all right?" I considered the question, feeling its weight settle in my chest. Was I all right? The woman I'd been when this began, the one who believed in love's simple beauty, who trusted in the truth of smiles and the weight of promises, that woman was gone forever. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that sometimes the most powerful act of self-love is the refusal to be made small by another's betrayal. "I'm something better than all right," I replied, sliding my engagement ring off my finger. "I'm free." Later that night, in the sanctuary of my workshop, I melted down both rings, my engagement ring and the one that had exposed Luke's lies. The precious metals swirled together in the crucible, their separate histories dissolving into possibility. From their combined essence, I would create something new. Not a symbol of love or betrayal, but a testament to transformation. As I worked through the night, shaping the molten metal with the skills passed down through generations of my family, I thought about the nature of creation. "Every piece of jewelry tells a story," my grandfather used to say. But what he never mentioned was that sometimes the most important story isn't in the final piece, it's in the hands that craft it, in the heart that survives its own breaking, in the spirit that learns to forge strength from pain. The sun was rising when I finished, casting long shadows across my workbench. The new piece lay before me, a pendant, its design complex and unconventional, featuring a phoenix rising from abstract flames. The metal held memories of both rings, but its form spoke only of rebirth. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Luke's arrest was making headlines, his carefully constructed empire crumbling in the harsh light of scrutiny. The article mentioned multiple victims coming forward, each with their own story of manipulation and financial fraud. In trying to destroy me, he had ultimately destroyed himself. But as I held my creation up to the morning light, I realized something profound. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. Every betrayal carries within it the seeds of transformation, if you're brave enough to plant them in the ashes of what was lost. I placed the pendant in a velvet box, not for sale or display, but as a personal talisman of survival. Then I began preparing my workshop for the day ahead. There would be other stories to tell, other pieces to create, other transformations to witness. But now I understood the truth that had eluded me before: the most precious things we create aren't the ones we shape from metal and stone, but the versions of ourselves we forge in the aftermath of breaking.